So forgive me, I will be looking down a little bit at my iPad during this part so that I can read you some examples. Um, I do want you to keep in mind, first of all, a few more tips when you're thinking about your subject matter, and these will play out in the examples that we're about to look at. Um, First of all, think about, how you can analyze things through a larger lens, like we talked about in the first video. Think about big issues, but also, just making sense of something that fans may have noticed lately. Trends are very, very big. People love to read about trends. So think about those kinds of things. Like if you go to the movies, you notice something unusual going on that's going on across many different kinds of movies. That might be a trend, and maybe there's something you can look into. And we're going to look at an example of that in a minute. Another thing you can think about is if you notice emotional reactions to some big event. I'm thinking of course, the recent Beyonce Super Bowl extravaganza and how excited and intense some of the reaction was. If you look at Twitter, you can often tell what the things should be that you want to discuss in blog posts the next day, because that's going to be hot on the internet. And especially if you can take it forward a little bit beyond just, oh my gosh, that was amazing, or I hate Beyonce and this confirms it. You really want to be able to explain why there might have been such a strong reaction to such a phenomenon. You don't want to force too much, into your pieces. You don't want to force analysis and opinion just to kind of attract blog traffic, as many people do, you may notice. And I have shared with you a blog post that I wrote about just that phenomenon. That is in the resources section. But, as long as you write into your passion and you're writing about stuff you feel genuinely about, you're not just whipping up emotion to get the traffic, you'll be just fine. And also just think about what you're talking about with your friends. That goes back to the Twitter thing, but if people are posting like crazy about something on Facebook, if it's actually coming up in real live conversation, which some people still have, in-person conversation, if you notice that happening, that might be a good topic for you to explore as well. So think about ways you can kind of take those things and then explore them. Why is this happening? How is it happening? What does this mean? Those are sort of the big questions that you want to look into answering with what you write. So I wanted to do a little bit of reading for you. You guys can read the entire pieces. I posted about them in the resource section, but I'm just going to read the beginnings of two fairly recent pieces that I think work really well, and also, by the way, are in very respected publications. So clearly, we're in the right direction here. You're not just going to be writing for In Touch Weekly or something like that if you write about pop culture, I promise you. The first piece is a next day blog post from the New Yorker about the Oscars. And if you will recall, if you're into movies and you watch the Oscars, you may have noticed there was a lot of vitriolic reaction the next day to Seth MacFarlane hosting, and kind of the sexist nature of almost all of what he did. So this is from that, and what I really liked about this piece is it does a lot of the things we just talked about, right? It takes the very intense reactions of a lot of people and tries to explain them, and it even went a step farther. I mean, I think it was pretty obvious from the start, with that, and we'll be talking about this when I read this, but that we saw your boobs skit made it clear from the beginning, no one was unclear about what was going on. It was sexist. But this took it even a step farther and tied it into the discussions going on about women in the workplace right now. Sheryl Sandberg's big book, Lean In, all of that good stuff. And it worked. She wasn't forcing anything. So I'm just going to read you the first two paragraphs and you can kind of see. Watching the Oscars last night meant sitting through a series of crudely sexist antics led by a scrubby, self-satisfied Seth MacFarlane. That would be tedious enough, but the evening's misogyny involved a specific hostility to women in the workplace, which raises broader questions than whether the Academy can possibly get Tina Fey and Amy Poehler to host next year. It was unattractive and sour and started with a number called We Saw Your Boobs, We Saw Your Boobs was the song and dance routine in which McFarlane and some grinning guys named actresses in the audience in the movies in which their breasts were visible. That's about it. What made it worse was that many of the movies mentioned, if not all, were pretty great. Silkwood, Brokeback Mountain, Monsters Ball, Monster, The Accused, Iris, and not exactly teen exploitation pictures. The women were not showing their bodies to amuse Seth MacFarlane, but rather to do their job. Or did they just think they were doing serious work? You girls think you're making art, the Academy, through MacFarlane, seemed to say, but all we, and the we was resolutely male, really see is that we got you to undress. The joke's on you. At a moment when Sheryl Sandberg, the Facebook chief operating officer, talks about how women have to lean into the workplace, Seth MacFarlane pops up from behind to say, so we can see your boobs. So you can see she's tying this into a lot of broader issues. She also kind of does a callback to Tina Fey and Amy Poehler hosting the recent Golden Globes and doing a really great job of it. So there's a lot going on here, and the more you can kind of tie together multiple cultural elements, the better off you are. See, just in these first two paragraphs, we've got the Oscars and Seth MacFarlane, but we also have, some context with the movies and how serious they were, and also bringing it into the Sheryl Sandberg discussion and whatnot. So those are the sorts of things you want to aim for when you're trying to write smart about pop culture. I'm going to read you one more example in this video, and this is from The Atlantic. And this is a piece called Why Are Romantic Comedies So Bad? This got a lot of pickup and play, which is always a good thing. Lots of people were talking about it. And basically, the writer set out to explore exactly the question it asked: why are romantic comedies so bad? And it's something that I think a lot of us have been talking about kind of amongst ourselves lately. You go to another movie, if you even can find a romantic comedy, and you walk out and kind of go like, what is going on? Do you guys remember when we used to have When Harry Met Sally? So he really dug into it and tried to explain why this might be happening. So this is the first two paragraphs. The romantic comedy has fallen on tough times. After a decade of essentially printing money, the genre abruptly ran out of box office steam in 2012. I would argue possibly earlier. As the producer Linda Obst, a rom-com doyen, Sleepless in Seattle, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, told New York Magazine's Vulture blog in December, it's the hardest time of my 30 years in the business. In a departure from February's gone by, the weeks leading up to Valentine's Day this year were devoid of a single helping of romantic froth featuring Drew Barrymore or Kate Hudson or any of the multitude of Jennifers. No 50 first dates, no fool's gold. No, he's just not that into you. So what happened? A range of explanations has been offered, from studios ever more obsessed with blockbuster franchises to a generation of moviegoers less starry-eyed than their predecessors. But this line of inquiry misses the point. The proper question isn't why have romantic comedies suddenly stopped being profitable, but rather why have they been so lackluster for decades? Exactly. The fact that the 2009 Katherine Heigl vehicle, The Ugly Truth, made a great deal of money in no way alters the fact that it was atrocious. I am not by nature a cinematic declinist, and it's true that classics of the genre have been sprinkled across the years, from the bittersweet doubt of Annie Hall, to the ascending optimism of When Harry Met Sally and Pretty Woman, to the raunchy recitations of Judd Apatow. But when one thinks back on the works reliably churned out by the likes of Tracy and Hepburn and Grant and the other Hepburn, it's rather hard not to get dispirited. So this then goes on, this is a very long piece, this goes on to basically end up positing that the reason romantic comedies are not so great these days is that romance has fundamentally changed and we don't have as many barriers to, say, getting together and living happily ever after, like Romeo and Juliet did, or that sort of thing. You can debate amongst yourselves or your friends whether or not that is something you agree with as the main reason, but it's certainly an interesting hypothesis, and he backs it up, and he walks through a lot of other interesting cultural phenomena along the way. So take a look at those two pieces and think about, of course, again, how you might be able to emulate some of those things in your own pieces.